thank you again for accepting our invitation and being here today for cocktails and current events. Today, we're going to open up with Cuba. Cuba's an interesting situation right now. Really look at some of the narrative going on when it comes to oil. Cuba, some people are saying that they have less than 14 days. And with that intro, I'm going to kind of open up for your expertise on foreign events.
Yeah, Cuba is an absolutely fascinating place. I hope that however the situation resolves itself, it does so in such a way that I can actually go there and visit as a tourist, because I've always wanted to visit Cuba. I have not had the opportunity. But let me start by saying real quick, just like maybe 30 seconds to a minute on the background of Cuba. It was part of the Spanish Empire until the late 19th century when we liberated it during the Spanish-American War.
And we being the United States of America.
We being the United States, correct. And this is Teddy Roosevelt, his famous Rough Riders riding up San Juan Hill. There's a huge backstory. You don't need to know that. It's not really important. Cuba became an independent country, but it was pretty much economically and politically dominated by the United States for the next 50 or 60 years. And that political and economic domination led to a lot of resentment in Cuba, which definitely aided in the rise of communist Cuba and the Castro regime. So Castro came to power, I want to say in 1959. Don't quote me on the date, but it should be about that time. And since that time, we've kind of had a grudge match because of the malign perception that the Cubans had, or the Cuban regime had, for the American regime. They very quickly aligned themselves with the Soviet Union and the communist bloc. And it's really important that you put this in a Cold War context, because that really sets the tone for how we approached Cuba for the rest of the 20th century. It got really heated during the 1960s, culminating with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Fortunately for everybody, we were able to come to a reasonably amicable relationship, or a resolution to that. The Soviet Union backed down. We actually conceded hosting nuclear missiles in Turkey, in addition to the Soviets withdrawing theirs from Cuba. So it was kind of a win-win for both sides. But the Castro regime very much remained aligned with the Soviet Union until the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that led to the foundation for a lot of the economic problems that they have today. The communist philosophy that was implemented in Cuba was never economically viable. They relied on a lot of external inputs to prop up their economy. So when the Soviet Union was no longer providing that, it really fell on hard times. Fast forward to early 21st century, their support is mostly coming from Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela in the form of cheap oil to try to prop up their economy. And we saw very dramatically at the beginning of this year that regime was toppled, or Maduro himself was removed from Cuba, or from Venezuela rather. And the Trump administration has pressed heavily on Venezuela to cease all oil shipments to Cuba in an effort to make some sort of deal. He's also leaned heavily on Mexico to cut off oil shipments. And just on Friday or Saturday, Trump signed an executive order calling Cuba a national security threat and threatening tariffs on any country that sells oil to Cuba.
Right, and this is already after Trump has threatened Mexico several times on cartel and other issues. So what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, so from Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, her first name escapes me, forgive me, but President Sheinbaum, she is...
You can call her doctor if you like.
Doctor. I figured she'd be happy with president, but President Doctor, how's that?
There you go.
President Dr. Sheinbaum, she's skating a tough line right now. Because just like in Canada, their economy is very, very reliant on the United States. We're their major export country. So if we're not buying their goods, their economy is going to suffer a lot, which is going to lead to a lot of domestic social problems. So she is doing the best she can to navigate that situation. She claims that the cutting off oil to Cuba is not part of the Trump administration's pressure. I personally don't buy it. I'm pretty sure it is. but she's got to sell it to her domestic constituency as well. Whatever the case,
Cuba has not a large standing army.
It does not.
They don't really have a navy. They don't have nuclear facilities or missiles. What am I missing is the blonde here on their national security threat to America.
So the best connection I can make, and I scratch my head on this one a little bit as well. They do still host intelligence agencies from Russia and probably from China that do signal intelligence into the United States. So it's not dissimilar from a Russian perspective. They're seeing NATO encroach upon their eastern border, and that's why they claim they're fighting in Ukraine. So it's not dissimilar to that situation. We're seeing what we perceive as a hostile approach to our southern border in the form of Cuba, Russia and China using Cuba as a vehicle to posture not military forces, but that gray zone sort of thing to be able to project disrupting influences, do intelligence intercepts, that sort of thing from Cuba into the United States. So that's the best analogy I can make. The Trump administration has also said that they're supporting terrorists. That's a stretch. The Cuban economy is so poor right now that they're having a hard time keeping the lights on. There have been rolling blackouts. I don't see them shipping money overseas to support anybody.
Well, Nick, as somebody who under NSPM 7 is most likely a domestic terrorist, I mean, who knows at this point?
Yeah,
childless cat ladies and gangs of organized, wine moms everywhere, right? So
it is. It's in the realm of the possible, and they certainly have access to more information than I do. Part of it may be too. The Trump administration certainly wants to deport any Cubans that don't have visas or citizenship. So that if Cuba isn't readily accepting them, they may be pressuring to do that. I personally think that he's probably trying to pursue some sort of regime change. What that exactly is going to look like is an open question, because as far as I know, there's no organized opposition. So how that would be any sort of smooth process to a stable and economically prosperous Cuba is beyond me.
But Marco Rubio could have another little protectorate under his wing.
Yeah, and that leads to, there is a substantial Cuban expat population in Florida that wields pretty tremendous political influence on Cuban policy.
Right,
and they are
on the map here for people not as familiar with the geography. And I think it's always important to just highlight, what is it, 90 miles?
It's 90 miles. It's 90 miles from Havana to Key West, so it is not a far distance. And Castro actually sent a whole bunch of in the 1970s and 80s. He did send a whole bunch of criminals on boats. He said, "Get out of my country and go to the United States." So the movie Scarface is actually very loosely based off of that. So that did happen.
So Nick, I want to transition us to something I'm tired of. Okay, like let me just be really honest with you. We had a little talk before the show, and I have fatigue at this point. This has been pretty much my entire life at this point. I am tired of talking about the Middle East, but I don't think we can continue the show without also talking about the situation in Iran, where ironically we are threatening actions over protesters against their government. This time we're in favor of the protesters as opposed to, anyways, Nick, I don't want to drag you into that. You're here. That's what I focus on most of my week. Your time here with Cocktails and Current Events is really to focus on the foreign affairs piece. And once again, welcome again, and appreciate you supporting the Book Horror universe. Yeah.
And thank you so much for having me. I can't say that I don't have Middle East fatigue as well. My entire adult life, that's where we have been focused and engaged, and has been the nexus of U.S. foreign policy. So as much as we try to get out, and I think George Bush actually said the pivot to the Pacific was something he wanted to do, but the Middle East keeps drawing us back in, no matter how hard we try to get out.
And Nick, I had put out an article after this. You and I have talked about it a lot. I don't think people are aware of the extent of operations, even just in the past year, that has happened in places like Syria, in the Middle East. So I just really want to highlight, this is a hotbed. It continues to be a hotbed. I know that we could go hours into Israel and Gaza and etc. But I really would like to kind of talk a lot about the current situation on Iran, but also with our allies in Saudi Arabia and the UAE?
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. Excuse me.
I think you need another drink.
I do think I need another drink. So Iran, if you've been living under Iraq, Iran has experienced probably the worst protests in there since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. To the point
when women lost the right to vote and be in public. Just wanted to highlight
that is absolutely a true statement, and we can go into deep dive about Iranian history later if you want. But I'm going to fast forward.
Always want to bring it back into why this should matter to the viewers.
Fair enough. But so bringing it back to current events. The Iranian protests have died down. During the protests, President Trump said that he was going to support them. Help was on the way. Keep fighting, keep protesting. The regime killed them en masse. The regime admits to at least 5,000. Reporting since then has put it probably north of 10,000 people killed in the protests. So the regime was pretty brutal in cracking down. Subsequent to that, the Trump administration sailed a carrier strike group into the Gulf in what most people assume is going to be some sort of military strike on Iran. Excuse me. As we prepare for that, both Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have said you can't use our airspace to launch strikes into Iran. Now, logistically, that's not a big problem for us. We don't need to go through their airspace for the carrier strike group, obviously. When we launched the B-2s back in last autumn, I think it was, we didn't fly through a Saudi or Emirati airspace. So the fact that they've done that is not a hindrance to United States operations. What they're trying to do is say to Iran, we are not part of this. If this becomes a war, a regional war, leave us out of it. Fight between you and the United States or you and Israel. If Iraq gets drawn in, if Kuwait gets drawn in, or even Qatar and Bahrain, if they get drawn in, that's not our dog, not our monkey, not our circus.
The geography of this a minute. I don't know if you know this, but my undergrad major was geography. So
I did not know that.
Yeah, something kind of cool every day. It was no Friday classes, so that was a life choice. Okay, so
I'll drink to that.
You have Qatar here, and the significance here is we all know that they gave Trump a plane. If you want to give a gift, giving a big jet is what you want on your list. You have Bahrain, who's been a historic ally. You have Kuwait. Remember all the different wars in Kuwait. I want to focus on Tehran up here, Afghanistan. So just kind of cover the geography, of course.
Yeah, so and why some of those are important. We have the U.S. Navy in the Middle East is based out of Bahrain. The U.S. Air Force in the Middle East is basically based out of Qatar. You'll hear Al Udeid Air Base. We do have an air base that we fly out of in UAE called Al Dhafra, and we have a base in Saudi Arabia we fly out of called PSAB, or Prince something Air Base. Just PSAB.
We have a couple bases still in Kuwait that we did from the
Al Salim is in Kuwait, and I think we've pretty much drawn down our presence in Iraq. We might have some advisors left, but I don't think we can project power from Iraq. But that said, they are still seen as, unless Maliki gets elected prime minister of Iraq, but that's a whole nother thing. They're still seen as under U.S. auspices and under U.S. direction from from Tehran's perspective. Now, I do want to make sure I hit what's really important here is Trump. He's claimed he wants an end to Iran's nuclear program. Okay, understood. Nuclear proliferation has been a big deal for us. A claim they don't want Iran continuing to support regional terrorist activity, and Iran has absolutely been doing that in the form of Hezbollah, in the form of Hamas, various groups in Syria and Iraq, the Houthis down in Yemen. Iran has been very, very disruptive across the region, trying to pursue hegemonic power. So we do absolutely want them to stop doing that. Most of those groups have been defanged, but they're not completely hapless. They still exist. Iran has also been building up a pretty big missile network to be able to attack their adversaries within the region. because they don't have much more of a conventional force. Their air force is basically non-existent. They're still flying F-4s and F-14s from the 1970s and 80s. So their air force does not pose a threat. They need to do so in another fashion, and they chose to pursue that with ballistic missiles, theater, and cruise missiles.
And cyber. Iran has disproportionately been effective in cyber.
They have, yes. I want to go back to the missiles, though, because you saw those during the fighting with Israel. They launched missiles directly into Israel. Some of those hit in Israel. So when they talk about they just oversaturated Israel's Iron Dome network. So throw that in the back of your mind when we talk about the Golden Dome. If the Iron Dome can get saturated, what's going to happen to Golden Dome? But again, another topic for another situation. Most people assume that Trump also wants regime change in Iran. The problem is, and this is where I think Saudi Arabia and UAE are really hedging, if the regime is toppled in Iran, there's no real clear replacement for it. There's not a single organized opposition. So there's a strong possibility that if the clerical regime ceased to exist, either a military dictatorship run by the current IRGC, which is basically the same government, would take over, or it would fall into the sort of chaos we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan for the last 20, 25 years, which is not good for anybody in the region. So that's what.
Yeah, we're going to have to summarize this up, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I get long-winded, don't I?
No. This is the fun of exploring a show together. And like I said, I'm super happy to have you here. You are such an expert in these areas. And it really just highlights the nuances. I feel like the thing with the Middle East, which goes into my Middle East fatigue, is these are courses about this. These are lectures about this. This is supposed to be a 15-minute-ish nuggets about it. And unfortunately, no matter how much time we have and no matter how many cocktails we have, we could talk about this all night.
I do get passionate about it. I apologize.
No, don't. You should be passionate. Every single time I'm out there and I'm crusading and I do talk about the women in Iran and the situation, and we have to be judicious and aware that in the United States, in anywhere, how quickly in 1979 women went from having rights and having freedom to not having any rights. And right now, when I see things going on in the world, I always put it in that lens, because my perspective always is it's only been about 100 years that people have had rights globally.
And I do want to take 30 seconds real quick to kind of defend the Iranian Revolution just for a second. Because the original Iranian Revolution wasn't set to take away women's rights. The original Iranian Revolution was a very liberal endeavor led by college students to try to liberalize and nationalize the nation. It was co-opted several months later by the theocratic regime that took power. So yes, women absolutely did lose their rights, and it ended up a way worse situation than the Shah was ruling. But that was never the intent when the Iranian students took to their streets in 1979.
Right, but you're really highlighting a key point there, which is the co-opting of it, and how when something goes extremely one way, it makes it open on the door to go extremely another way. I don't want to make analogies in the United States between Obama to Trump, but I'm just saying these things happen, whether they're very quick or maybe a little bit slower. With that, Nick, I'm going to give you the last words before we wrap up.
There's so much going on in the world, and I know it's a chore keeping up with everything. Domestically alone, it's the fatigue sets in. So I appreciate everyone is tuning in and trying to understand a little bit more of the world around them. And thank you, Amy, for having me.
I love that you're here. I love that you're an ally. Definitely tell Heather she's amazing as well. And with that, we are going to sign off, and we'll be back next week.